further ado, I want to introduce our speakers for today, and they'll introduce themselves, but we have Marie Day, who is here from Kennesaw State University, and we also have Miriam, last name.
It's okay, Joy. It happens to everybody. It's Nauenburg.
Nauenburg.
No worries.
Okay, from University of West Georgia. Thank you two ladies for being here this afternoon for this presentation. I'll let you take it away.
Great, thanks so much, Joy. Hi, everybody. I'm Miriam Nauenburg. I'm the Serials and Electronic Resources Cataloger at the University of West Georgia.
And I'm Marie Day, Systems Librarian at Kennesaw State University.
So what we're going to do today is we will be discussing ACRL and Ipeds statistics, particularly physical and electronic title counts, as well as physical circulation and volume counts. So we're hoping that if you've worked with these statistics before, this presentation will give you a little bit more material to chew on, maybe another way of approaching it. If you've never worked with them before, our goal is that you will leave this presentation today knowing how to get started. So we'll be focusing on ACRL annual survey instructions and definitions and the Ipeds data collection system survey materials. These are pretty much the same. Once you've done your ACRL statistics, you can submit them for Ipeds. So during this presentation, we might refer to just ACRL or just Ipeds. Most of the time, it's going to be interchangeable. So as some of you may know, ACRL opens in October, closes in February. Ipeds opens in December and closes in April. So that early springtime is a little hectic for assessment folks. You can use the ACRL statistics for Ipeds, as I mentioned, and they're looking for totals that are held at the end of the previous fiscal year. So we'll talk about how to do that. So let's dive into physical reports. So this is physical inventory. So just a few things, your reports may differ from those shown here depending on your local cataloging practices. So I'll be talking about what UWG does, but your situation may be different. Also, Ex Libris defines resource types and bib material types, and those are subject to updates. Sometimes there are new resource types that are created. So any changes will be noted in the release schedule, which as of this month has moved to a quarterly schedule. Also, if you use item material type in your reports, make sure they're accurate. During migration here at UWG, we had some records that were mapped to the material type not listed. We had some audio-visual strangeness that Shelley fixed. So just be careful about that. And also be prepared for the possibility of more complicated filtering because there are many, many more item material types in Alma than bib material types. And we'll talk about that distinction later on as well. Oops, sorry about that, folks. I think I opened a link and I didn't mean to. Let's go back and try that again. Okay, so as far as general tips, when you're getting started with this, this is my recommendation. Use the physical item subject area rather than the title subject area. And here's why. Physical items is updated daily. It's updated through the ETL process that runs every evening, whereas the title subject area is updated on a monthly basis. So it's a little more current to use physical items. Also, you can use many, many more filters in physical items. You can use location filters, and you can use, of course, item material type, item policy. It's just a little bit more control. So that's why we use physical items here. Also, run your title count reports on July 1st, and then save that spreadsheet in a secure location. The reason is that we cannot use bibliographic creation date as a filter in these reports because we all use the network zone to catalog. And there's no way to really specify the date that the bib was copied to your IZ. There's just the date that the bib was created in the NZ, which may not correspond with when you actually added your holdings to that bib. Just a note about material type. There are two fields called material type in the physical items subject area. So there's a field for bibliographic records, which is in the bibliographic details folder. And there's another field called material type that's in the physical item details folder. So these are named the same, and they're in the same subject area as well, which is also confusing. So as I'm talking about them in this section here on physical reports, I will refer to bib material type and item material type. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the data elements in analytics and how they correspond to some of the ACRL and Ipeds statistical categories. So these are some really commonly used fields in the reports. You can see that material type and resource type are both at the bibliographic level, and then we have two item columns, I guess, item categories, material type and item policy. You can also use location, and we'll discuss that too. So you can see that material type and resource type, bib material type, are both defined by Ex Libris, which makes them really good for this type of standardized kind of reporting. And material type at the item level is also defined by Ex Libris, but you can enable or disable some of these material types. Item policy, you have free reign at your institution to define those. Let's take a closer look at bibliographic material type. So there are 7 options that I've listed here. These are defined by Ex Libris based on Mark 21 codes used in the leader position 6, position 7, and the 007 position 00. So these roughly correspond to the types of resources that are specified in the ACRL instructions. And for that reason, we use bibliographic material type as our primary filter in the ACRL reports. And these are some of the sources for the bibliographic material type. Each of these would have an alphabetic code, a single letter code, which I don't include here, but this gives you an idea of the types of resources that are noted from these sources. Resource type, on the other hand, is much more expansive than bib material type. There are 58 options as opposed to 7. It includes 18 electronic resource types and 23 physical. The remainder are basically microformats, and there's also an undefined resource type. And this is also defined by Ex Libris based on Mark 21 codes used in the leader, but it also incorporates the 008, which contains data elements that are positionally defined by the type of material. So book, continuing resource, visual material, and so on. So this is used as the secondary filter in our reports because it is a much wider net that you're casting. And just be careful with these. If you haven't used this before, these are defined by content rather than form, which is kind of a general cataloging rule anyway. But therefore, an atlas is defined as a map, not as a book. Atlas microforms are defined as maps, not microforms, and so on. So bib material type and resource type work together, but a record can only have one bib material type and one resource type assigned to it. And if you do a search in analytics for a particular bib material type, you'll find that there are many resource types that can be associated with that bib material type. The opposite is also true, but to a lesser extent. There are fewer resource types that have different types of bib material types. And if a bib meets conditions of more than one resource type, which is possible, only the first one in the resource type mapping table is applied. And that's for this reason, and for some other reasons as well, which we'll get into. Our reports specify in nearly all instances, with one important exception, the bib material type and resource type for a given ACRL category. So it might seem like it's a little bit of overkill, but we do that just to be absolutely sure that we're pulling in the resources that we need. So moving now to the right of that table I showed you earlier, we're getting now into the item columns. Item material type versus item policy. Again, unlike item material types, item policies are defined by your library. You can, if you're not quite sure which one of these to use, or you just start getting started in this, I'd suggest running a report to see which field would be more useful for your institution's volume and cert count reports. We use item material type, and I suggest using it because it's standardized. There are fixed codes in Alma. And let me show you the difference. This is just an example from our analytics here, and you can see that item policy is a little bit more granular. You can see that there are several item policies for certain kinds of material type, especially in our reserves location. So just take a look around and see what will work for you. So now that we've discussed how some of the data elements are how certain fields in analytics can map up with the ACRL reports, let's look at building the analytics report from the bottom. So here's our general strategy. We use the bib material type definitions to map the resources specified in the ACRL instructions to analytics. So for example, in the ACRL physical books title count, you only need to include the book and the music bib material types. Then run the report with resource type field included with those bib material types that you chose to see which resource types are associated with those bib material types. And there will be a few for each bib material type. Next, start refining it. So then here's where we use the resource type definitions to map in a more granular way. In most cases, we don't really have to add or change anything, but sometimes we find that we have to exclude a resource type. So in this example here, if we continue the book and the music score thing, ACRL counts sound recordings under physical media and music scores under physical books. Now, both of these use the bib material type of music. So in this way, if you want to separate them for the ACRL count for physical books and then the other count for physical media, the only way to do that is to filter on resource type. And we'll look at an example later on when we look at the example reports. And then for circulation counts, at this point, use item material type or item policy or location, whatever works for your library, to exclude equipment and other resources that are not required in the ACRL count. And I think that's the only count that requires you to exclude equipment is the cert count. The last step is just a final check. And here's where we use location to exclude broad classes of items. And in this case, the three examples that I wanted to show you were for uncatalogued items, which are often excluded from these counts. We exclude the locations of acquisitions, reserves, and short loan. Those items are cataloged, but they're not cataloged completely, so we do exclude them. Owned or leased items, we exclude our ILL locations. And physical book titles, we exclude certain kinds of brief bibs or other functional types of bibs like bound with or membership or bibs in our serials department, which hold a lot of our test records. So let's start looking at how to build the report. So this is kind of the foundation of it. These are the fields that tend to be used over and over again. So for the physical titles report, we use the physical items subject area. You could also use titles if you wanted, as keeping in mind those caveats from earlier. And in physical items, we count on MMSID, and Marie will show you later how to do that if you haven't done it before. Also, we will add these filters, bibliographic details in repository, and bibliographic lifecycle in repository, and we also ask that records are not suppressed. For physical volumes, pretty similar. We still use bibs that are not suppressed. We are looking for items that are active, have an active life cycle. There's one exception to that for the cert count, which I'll talk about. And an item creation date that is less than the first day of the fiscal year. And that will get everything that was created prior to that fiscal year. For physical circulation, this is the fulfillment subject area. So we use loans not in-house because ACRL asks that we exclude in-house loans. We ask for location name and loan fiscal year. Now, if your library's Alma defined fiscal year doesn't match up with ACRL's date range that they want, you can use another filter on loan date and just say between and then whatever dates it would be, July 1st of 2021 and June 30th of 2022. And then with this particular count, be careful with the life cycle filter, because if we do not set a life cycle filter here, and the reason is if you set a life cycle filter when running this report, it will only return the items that have circulated and which are still in your catalog. So anything that circulated and has since been deleted will not be counted. So for that reason, we leave off the life cycle filter altogether, whereas normally we would include it. So let's take a look at some report examples. So this is the physical books definition. I'm not going to read through all of this, But the big things to pull out is that it does want us to include music scores as well as physical book titles, of course, and exclude serials, microforms, maps, non-print materials, and uncatalogued items. They also want us to include government documents. So here's how we parse this out. So for books, this is going to be bib material type of book, as well as for government documents. Music scores have a material type of music. And then you can see over here in this third column where we've listed the associated resource types. The final report here for physical books, you can see here we're in the physical items subject area. We've counted here on number of titles. And here is our report backbone of bibliographic life cycle and repository. We want things that are not suppressed from discovery. We have material type and resource type, which correspond with the previous slide to catch books and music scores and GovDocs. And then this location filter you can see here in the middle is to exclude all of our temporary or IZ locations, things that we just don't really count for ACRL. The volumes physical books count is similar. This isn't required for Ipeds, it's just ACRL. So here we are including serials. We are including bound serial volumes. So that is a slight difference there. And then we're also, again, excluding microforms, maps, non-print materials, and uncatalogued items. So here is how we match this up. Now, for books, music scores, and government documents, as well as serials, we do not include the resource types. When I ran this report and I got to step 2 of the strategy, and I saw the resource types that were associated with bibliographic material types of book, music, and journal, all of those resource types were A-okay. So I said, I don't need to include those again and have that second layer. So in this case, we just use the material type and that covers everything. To exclude microfilms, maps, and non-print materials, etc., we exclude these resource types listed here. So basically, in this case, we're not including material types we want, we're excluding resource types we don't want, just because so much is included in the definition for this particular category. And here's what our filters look like in analytics for this report. Again, you can see the backbone fields of life cycle and here item creation date, material type and resource type, and then excluding, this would be the step 3, excluding locations that do not match up with the definition. For physical serials, this one is pretty straightforward. It's just looking for journals. So you just have to add material type journal for these. Here's how they map out according to the ACRL instructions. I'm parsing them out by which material type bib and which resource type correspond to each item in the definition. And you can see here that all of these are journals. So it really would be your choice if you wanted to add these resource types. You don't have to, but that's how they would match up. Also note here for microforms, serial titles on microform, to include that resource type of microform. So in this case, microforms is definitely not optional. That would need to be included. And then here's what our report looks like on the criteria tab in analytics. And again, you can see we've included all of the serial resource types in addition to microforms to get the microform serials. Physical media is really, really fun. It has many categories. It wants us to include microforms, audiovisual materials, cartographic and graphic materials, and 3D artifacts and realia. So in this case, we're excluding microform serials from this count because they're counted under physical serials. So the way to do this is just don't include the journal's bib material type because you want everything else that's a microform. You just don't want journals on microform. So here's how it shakes out. So you can see here microforms, we have these bibliographic material types. And then of course, resource type microforms. This is going to bring all the things that are on microform that represent these other material types. Graphic materials and audiovisual materials. Again, mostly bringing in all the graphic resource types and manuscripts. And again, this continues 3D artifacts and cartographic materials. Some of these resource types are new, and some have to still be recalculated during the May 2020 semi-annual indexing. I just checked a few days ago, that hasn't happened yet. So some of these resource types may not be up and running yet, but they will be soon. And here's what our physical media final report looks like on the criteria tab. You can see it's pretty involved. For total physical circulation, this wants the ACRL here is asking for the total number of times physical items are checked out from the general and reserve collections. So in this case, do not include in-house circulation. So what we do here is to exclude the in-house circulations. We only use the loans not in-house field in fulfillment. To exclude ILL lending and borrowing, you can exclude your library's ILL locations. And to exclude transactions of equipment or computers, you can use any combination of item material type, item policy, or location to do that. And just like we talked about the strange material type field that has the same name, but it's in two different folders in the physical items subject area, there's a similar issue in the fulfillment subject area. Again, material type is the same name for two different fields. So one field is in the loan details folder. The other field is in the physical item details folder. And the difference is, like I've reproduced here, this little screenshot in the lower right-hand corner of the screen, the material type field in physical item details is more descriptive. It's actually like it is a description rather than a code, you could say. The material type field in loan details uses a code. So we use material type from physical item details. I'd recommend that just because it is more descriptive. And here's what the total physical circulation count would look like. And again, your reports might look a little different on the criteria tab, and that's okay. So just to wrap all of this up here before I turn things over to Marie, if possible, ensure accuracy of your item material types to give you a little bit more control in reporting. Prepare your reports as early as possible so you're not rushed and you have time to ask questions. This can sometimes be a group effort. There are often many different people involved with these reports and many different departments. So just try to get started as soon as you can so you're not rushing up to the end. Also use the physical items subject area rather than titles, just because of those reasons I specified. It's updated more frequently. You also have more control with filters at the location and item level. If you wanted to use those, you'd be able to in physical items rather than titles. Also use resource type filters to supplement and refine your material type filters. And export and save your title reports on July 1st. Get that snapshot of your database because it will be pretty much impossible to do that afterward. Okay, I'm going to turn things over to Marie for electronic reports.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the electronic reports portion of the program. So I'm going to talk about column B in ACRL 40, 42, and 43. Now, because those are electronic items, and I should say here at Kennesaw State, we don't use digital items, those numbers will vary day to day because collection content fluctuates. Of course, you'll have your technical services people and also the vendors working in those collections. So, you know, if I'm testing and I run a report yesterday and today and it's 23 different, nothing to stress about. I use the network zone analytics so that I can retrieve institutional zone and network zone managed electronic titles. So your institutional zone analytics, the usual ones that open up when you're in Alma, is only going to report collections managed at your institution. The network zone analytics is separate. You can ask for the login if you don't have that, and you'll see the GIL logo in the corner instead of your institution's logo. Reports do take a little bit longer to run there because, of course, you're looking at all of our institutions. So there are actually 3 options for doing these electronic items reports. One that I know some institutions use is an advanced search in Alma. And you can certainly do that. I will say that when I tested that at first, my search, it came up with the institutional items, and then there's a combined search option. And then I got that number, but when I looked, some of those items belong to other institutions. But what you would do is save a set, save your search as a set, and then you can go back and use it later. And now that I've played around with it a little bit, it works. So this has happened to me multiple times in Alma and Alma Analytics. When I try something the first time, it doesn't work. Yet another day it does. So I don't know if there's some variable that I'm missing, or if this, modern technology just wants you to be predictable, and it takes a few times before it says, oh, you want to do that. Got it. So I don't know. So the lesson from that is, if you get stuck and you're not getting results you think you should get, go ahead, stop, take a walk around campus, come back, maybe next week, try it again. So let's talk about the analytics report. And you could do that either in the title subject area or the e-inventory subject area. When I first started doing these reports, I was frustrated because I went to e-inventory. I thought electronic items, okay, I'll go to e-inventory, but you can't count titles there unless you do something fancy. And we have some slides about that later so that you can do that. It's more complicated to count titles. You can count titles very easily in the title subject area. The problem with that is that subject area is updated every 30 days. It's not nightly like the rest of analytics. So the end of the year fiscal data will be available sometime in July. And I should say it's a 30-day period. It's not updated on a certain day. And while you're working in analytics, make sure you refresh your Alma tab, because it can absolutely time out on you. Just go back over there, click on your logo, or run a search for some random word. Reports may take longer to run in the network zone. Also, you'll see this folder called Portfolio Details for Consortium members. When you're designing a report using that folder, you should use only that folder. That does not work for these reports because the needed qualifiers are unavailable. So just ignore that for this purpose. Okay, on to 40 column B, it's book and music. And here's the definition. So here's what my criteria look like. Now the main criteria is this number of titles with electronic portfolios. Active is the key word. And you could leave out these other 2. You could take them out of the column area. But you do need these filters here, which are similar to the physical items, a little bit different. Not suppressed from discovery. Material type is equal to book and music. And then all the book and music resource types. The big difference is going to be you're going to add the institution code. So you're going to add the code for your institution, and then also for the GALILEO network. And I put at the bottom a link to documentation about using the leader position. Here, I've just used the material type and resource type. Now, when I set this up, I looked at all the codes that were available and looked at the facets and how would I make sure that the items I'm pulling are accessible to me. They really belong to my institution. So I did a test. I made a copy of this report. I added an untitled field, and then I filtered it. I said, title begins with, Q or TH or whatever. And then I ran a report. And then I opened up Primo and I searched for some of those titles just to make sure, yes, I'm seeing ones that I can actually get to that are in my discovery system. And so that is what worked, those two codes. And then here's results. The reason I added the data updated is because it's different for the titles area. You don't have to put that there, but you can, and I put a link to the directions if you haven't used the narrative field before. And then so you'll see for the active electronic portfolios for my institution and for the Galileo network, and then a total. And I have some slides on how to do that if you haven't done that before. When you're working with electronic portfolios, it's very important to make sure that they are active. They've been activated in your catalog. And so there's already a pre-made criteria for that in the titles section, but you could also do number of titles with electronic portfolios and then do a separate criteria, is or is not active. It does give you the same results. You can test that for yourself. Okay, for 40B, this is the e-inventory subject area. So the number of titles is the important thing, but you have to create that in e-inventory. And we have some slides about that coming up. If you need to exclude something, for example, during the pandemic, if you turn on the HathiTrust emergency access collection, you need to exclude that for your ACRL reports. And this is how you could do that. So same type of filters, not suppressed from discovery, institution codes, material type, resource type, life cycle is in the repository, availability is available, and then the electronic collection public name, change the default is equal to is not equal to, and then choose whichever collection that you want to exclude. You see here up the top that we use the MMSID field to count on, and we edited the filter in order to get a count of titles instead of a count of items, because I'm sure you might have 4 different portfolios for the same title. One's in EBSCO, one's in Gale, one's in ProQuest, what have you. But the definition is asking for a count of titles. So in order to do that, you have to edit the column formula. This is what it looks like in Analytics. When you open that choice, the expression is automatically selected. Leave it that way, and then click at the bottom left, choose aggregate, and then choose count distinct. And then here's a sample result. You'll get a list. In this case, we left the collection name in there. Okay, if you want to add the total, you do that from the results view, not from the criteria view. You'll click on the pencil icon at the top right, and then you'll click on the sigma icon, and then you choose after. That's pretty much your only choice. And then that will give you what I showed you before, the grand total at the bottom. So that's how you do that. Now moving on to electronic media, column B. For this one, you'll see that we have to exclude serials. So the main criteria is the title measures number of titles with electronic portfolios active. There are quite a few resource types. Material type is simple, and you need to exclude journals. And then not suppressed from discovery. When you save these reports, the names will change to numbers after you save them. When you go back later, they'll have a number, but that's okay. It's the same thing. But you can go back and open the filter, double check, put in your name and the Galileo network, and it is the same. And here's the results. And like Miriam said, you may want to run some test reports and see how your material types and resource types add up. Okay, electronic serials, 43 column B, quite a few resource types there as well. And of course, you'll have these slides later for reference. So this is what that looks like. The title measures number of titles with electronic portfolios active, again, is your main column. All the resource types for serials, the material type is equal to journal, not suppressed from discovery, the life cycle is in repository, and then the institution code, and that's only in the network zone analytics, is equal to your institution in the Galileo network. And here's the sample result with the total. So for electronic titles, definitely prepare your reports early so that you have time to think things through, ask questions. You might need to talk to your catalogers and find out how things have been done over the years. You also want to save the reports for next year to ensure consistency. And if you're going to do a good job, it takes a long time to construct these reports. So you want to save them so that you can use them next year. For the electronic titles, use titles or e-inventory. Check for the title subject area update with the June data so that you get the end of the fiscal year information. Run it in the network zone. I do include the filters that is active and in repository. And my final tip, report and search results should be reproducible. Sometimes Alma just stops working. You might need to log out and start fresh. Okay, and back to you, Miriam.
Hey, thanks, Marie. So everybody, we have here on this slide just some resources that we referenced in this presentation. So the first link is to a LibGuide for ACRL. It's of course not the most recent one. You'd need a login for that, but it does give some past surveys. It also has a lot of different instructions and give you a sense of what it looks like if for any reason you can't log into the current one. And then also we have a link to Ipeds 21-22 survey materials and Ex Libris links identifying the bibliographic material type. They'll show you how they do that based on mark codes in those fixed fields that we mentioned. Also for resource type definitions, how those are defined by Ex Libris. Configuring item policies and item material type descriptions. So this would be item material types, how they're defined and the different things you can do with them. And we also have a link here at the very bottom to our GIL Analytics Wiki. So if you are interested in analytics, please visit us on our wiki. We're building it up all the time and we'd like to see you there. Thank you all for listening. We appreciate you being here. And now we have some time for questions. If anybody would like to enter them in the chat or ask, turn on their microphone, whatever works for you.
I see one question from Shelley Rogers. Do the ACRL and Ipeds questions remain pretty much the same year to year?
You know,
So
Shelley,
go ahead.
Yeah, I haven't been doing this a long time, so I can't speak long range, but in my experience, it does tend to stay pretty stable. Just talking about the physical side of things, I haven't noticed a whole lot of changes. So yes, we're able to keep the same reports. The only thing to be careful of is every year, if there are resource types that are added by Ex Libris, we have to take those into account when we're updating our reports. Also, something else that comes up is if we've created any new item policies upon which the reports are based, we need to include those or exclude them, however they're added in a filter. And the same would go for any item material types that have been turned on and any new locations that have been added. So what I usually do is here at University of West Georgia, if we have any new locations or any new item policies that we've created or item material types that we have enabled, I will try to remember to go into our ACRL reports and just update them at that time. Because otherwise you may not remember that there was that change. But that change is coming from the local practice side, not necessarily the statistical bodies, issuing new instructions. Marie, do you have anything from the electronic side that you want to add about if anything changes?
No, I've only been doing them a few years. There was a change last year, but I had already done it that way anyway, so that was lucky. But definitely, if you're not the assessment librarian, check with them, or I'm sure they will tell you if there is a change.
Okay, great. Shelley says, thanks. Are there any additional questions from the audience? Jim Rickerson said earlier, this was excellent. He had typed in some things above, but he may have answered his own question in one instance.
Sure, and if you're new to working with these, definitely feel free to reach out to us. I'm happy to get on a video call and look at your version of analytics and see what's going on. That's what we've done here at Kennesaw State. I worked with Lee Chin. Some of you may know her. She's been around for a long time, and we just worked through the reports step by step. And also shout out to Rick Gooden, who just left us for Georgia Tech. And we just go through, try things, check things, do some sample reports, and until we got it refined.
Okay, well, I'm not seeing any additional questions. And I do remember that your email addresses were on the slides, I think at the beginning.
Yes.
But everyone will have access to the slides on the Sketch platform. And the recording will also be uploaded there shortly. Even after the event ends, the Sketch site will stay up, but you'll also be able to go to the GUGM website and the materials will be there as well. So I want to thank Marie and Miriam for bringing this presentation to us today. We hope that it was helpful for you all, and I appreciate your attendance. And so enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you to our speakers as well. And we'll see you guys later on. Thank you. Bye now.